"Sir, your wallet." The words cut clean through the rain, sharp enough to make the man stop with one polished shoe still half inside the black SUV. Daniel Whitmore turned, annoyance already gathering between his brows, and for a second the whole curb seemed to hold its breath. Water slid off the edge of the hotel awning in silver sheets. Headlights smeared across the wet pavement. A valet froze with the passenger door open. Naomi Carter stood 3 steps back from the curb, rain soaking through the thin denim jacket she had worn for 3 winters too many, one hand wrapped around a dark leather wallet that looked like it belonged in a world that had never once made room for her. She had found it less than a minute earlier beside the stone planter near the entrance, half hidden under a newspaper, heavy with cash, cards, and the kind of effortless wealth that could have paid her electric bill, her past-due rent, and maybe even groceries for the rest of the week. Instead, she had picked it up, wiped the rain from the leather with the edge of her sleeve, and run. Not because life had been kind to her. It had not. Not because she expected gratitude. She did not. But because some habits lived deeper than hunger, and Naomi had been raised by a mother who believed that what you carried home mattered less than what you could still carry in your soul. Daniel's driver stepped forward at once, fast and professional, his dark umbrella tilting toward his employer as if the rain itself should know better than to touch him. "I'll take that," the driver said, reaching for the wallet, but Naomi did not let go right away. Not from defiance. Just one extra heartbeat. Long enough to make sure the man in the cashmere coat actually looked at her. He did, finally, and the look on his face was brief but familiar. The quick calculation. The polished suspicion. The silent question people asked when they saw a tired black woman standing too close to something expensive. Naomi felt it land and pass through her like cold wine through a cracked window. She had felt worse. Daniel extended his hand. Not rudely. Not warmly either. Just with the clipped impatience of a man whose days were measured in meetings and signatures and numbers too large to feel real. Naomi placed the wallet in his palm. The leather was warm now from her grip, though the rain kept slipping down her wrist in icy threads. "You dropped it by the planter," she said. Her voice came out calm, even after the sprint, even after the long shift at Rosie's diner, even after standing for 8 hours on sore feet while smiling at strangers who never looked above her name tag. Daniel gave a small nod, the kind that ended conversations without ever beginning them. "There's a reward inside," the driver said, already reaching for his inside pocket like the matter could be solved with folded bills. Naomi shook her head once. Her curls clung damply to her temples. "Keep it," she said. Then her eyes lifted past Daniel's shoulder, toward the darkened back seat of the SUV, where a small figure sat barely visible behind the tinted glass. A child, still as a shadow. Naomi's fingers tightened around nothing now. Only memory, only the ghost of what she had tucked inside the wallet before she ran it back. Not money, not a note asking for help. Something smaller, softer, something rain had almost ruined and a little girl had definitely lost. Daniel slipped into the SUV without another word, the door sealing shut with a rich, muted thud. For a moment Naomi remained on the curb, rain tapping against her shoulders, diner shoes filling slowly with cold water. Then the SUV pulled away from the hotel lights and into the slick Manhattan night, carrying the wallet, the silence, and the one thing Naomi knew that man would not be able to hold without feeling it break something open inside him. Inside the SUV, the city became quiet in the expensive way money makes things quiet. Rain ticked softly against the tinted windows. The leather seats held the faint scent of cedar and cologne. Somewhere up front, the driver murmured into his headset, but Daniel Whitmore barely heard him. He had already set the wallet on his lap and opened it with the absent, efficient motion of a man who checked problems before they had time to grow teeth. Everything appeared untouched. His black cards were still there. His identification. A folded stack of cash. Nothing missing. For one brief second, he felt almost irritated at himself for even looking twice. Then something caught against his thumb. Not leather. Not paper stock. Thinner. Softer. He frowned and pulled it free. It was a child's drawing, folded in half, the edges damp and feathered from the rain. He stared at it without opening it, as if the paper itself had weight. From the back seat came the smallest shift of fabric. Lily. She had not spoken since they left the hotel. She rarely did anymore, not with him. Daniel unfolded the drawing carefully. Crayon marks spread across the page in bright, uneven strokes, a little crooked from the weather, but still painfully clear. A man, a woman, a little girl between them, all three holding hands beneath a yellow sun much too large for the page. The woman had long brown hair. The little girl had a pink dress and a smile shaped like a crescent moon. The man was taller than both of them, with one arm stretched protectively overhead. Above their heads, in the uncertain block letters of a child still learning how to fit feelings into words, were 7 that landed harder than any accusation ever could. Daddy used to look at me. Daniel stopped breathing for a beat, so long it felt borrowed. The inside of the car seemed to narrow around him. The streetlights sliding across the glass cast pale bars of light over the drawing, over his knuckles, over the wedding band he still wore, though the hand beneath it had grown colder these last 2 years. He looked at the woman in the picture again and did not need her name written anywhere. Emily. Before the hospital rooms. Before the flowers. Before sympathy cards stacked in silver trays by the front door, and people lowering their voices around him as if grief were a sleeping animal that might wake angry. His throat tightened with sudden, humiliating force. He had told himself he was surviving. That providing, protecting, scheduling, managing, enduring, those things counted. That a child would understand someday how much pressure a man could carry after loss hollowed out the center of the house. But the drawing in his hand said what no board member, no therapist, no family friend had dared to say plainly. Lily had not lost only her mother. She had lost the version of her father who used to kneel when she spoke, who used to notice the color she chose first from the crayon box, who used to sit on the edge of her bed long after the bedtime story ended because she asked one more question, then one more after that. Daniel lowered the paper slowly and looked into the rearview mirror. Lily sat buckled into the corner of the back seat, her small coat buttoned crooked, one hand curled around the frayed ear of a stuffed rabbit. Her face was turned toward the rain-streaked window, but he could see her reflection in the glass. She had seen the drawing. She knew he had read it. And still she said nothing. That silence was worse than tears. It felt earned. Where did this come from? He asked, though the answer was already standing in the rain behind them in his mind. A tired woman in a worn jacket choosing decency when the night had given her every excuse not to. The driver glanced up. Sir. Daniel did not answer. He only looked down at the softened crayon lines again and felt something crack open inside him. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet break, the kind that happens when a truth has been waiting too long in the dark. Naomi did not notice how badly her socks were soaked until she finally sat down on the late bus downtown and the cold began climbing from her shoes into her bones. The city outside the scratched window looked smeared and restless, all neon and puddles, and steam rising off grates like the streets were trying to breathe. She set her diner apron on her lap and pressed both hands over it, still feeling the shape of the wallet she had carried, the damp softness of the drawing she had slipped inside, and the brief, polished distance in Daniel Whitmore's eyes when he took it back. Around her, the bus hummed with ordinary exhaustion. A nurse in pale blue scrubs leaned against the glass with her eyes shut. A teenage boy in a grocery store uniform nodded off with earbuds still in. 2 women whispered in Spanish over a plastic bag full of takeout containers. Nobody looked at Naomi, and tonight that felt like a mercy. She rested her forehead against the cold window and let the vibration of the bus travel through her skin. She had not planned to leave the drawing. At first she had only meant to return the wallet and walk away. But then she had seen the little girl in the back seat, still as winter, and something inside Naomi had pulled tight. She knew that kind of quiet. She knew how children could go wordless when the hurt got too large to name. By the time she got off on 116th Street, the rain had thinned to a silver mist. Her apartment building stood wedged between a discount pharmacy and a laundromat with flickering fluorescent lights, the bricks darkened by years of weather and neglect. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of bleach, radiator heat, and somebody frying onions 2 floors down. Naomi climbed 3 flights with tired legs and unlocked apartment 3B, the door sticking at the frame before giving way with a familiar scrape. The room beyond was small enough that one lamp could soften all of it at once. A narrow bed tucked beneath the window. A chip table with 2 chairs, though she lived alone. A hot plate on the counter. A thrift store bookshelf with paperbacks, church devotionals, and a row of children's storybooks she had never been able to give away. Naomi set down her keys, peeled off her wet jacket, and stood for a moment in the hush. Rain tapped lightly against the window unit. The radiator hissed, then clanked. On the table, in a silver frame no bigger than her hand, was the photograph she always looked at first and never for too long. Isaiah, 8 years old, big brown eyes, a grin missing one front tooth. He had been holding up a crayon drawing in that picture too, proud as if it belonged in a museum. Naomi crossed the room and touched the frame with 2 fingers. "You would have told me to leave it in there," she whispered, a tired smile brushing her mouth. Isaiah had been the kind of child who noticed sadness in grocery store cashiers and stray cats under parked cars. The kind who once gave away his favorite red scarf because another boy at church said he was cold. He had also been the kind of child who went quiet when his heart started failing him, not because he was brave, but because he did not want his mother to hear fear in his voice. Naomi knew silence. She had sat beside it in hospital rooms under fluorescent light. She had held small hands that no longer had the strength to color. So when she saw that little girl in the back of the SUV, eyes fixed on the rain like the world had gone somewhere without her, Naomi did not think about the cash in the wallet or the subway fare in her pocket or the rent notice folded on her counter. She thought about all the things children dropped when grown-ups were too broken to notice. And she prayed, as she reached for the kettle and listened to it begin its low metal rattle, that maybe one man somewhere in this city would finally open the right thing and understand what he had almost lost. She drew that on the day you missed her school recital. The sentence followed Daniel Whitmore through the front door like something colder than the rain. He stopped in the marble foyer with the damp drawing still in his hand and turned toward Mrs. Alvarez, the housekeeper who had been with the family long before the suits, the investors, and the private schedules had swallowed his life whole. She stood near the staircase with a folded dish towel draped over one arm, her silver hair pinned back, her face lined with the kind of patience that only comes from years of cleaning up after grief without ever being allowed to name it. Daniel looked at her as if he had not understood the words, though he had. Every one of them. "What recital?" he asked, and the moment the question left his mouth, he hated the sound of it. Mrs. Alvarez did not answer right away. She only glanced toward the back seat as the driver opened Lily's door under the porte-cochere, and the little girl stepped out with her stuffed rabbit tucked beneath one arm. Even in the soft entryway light, she looked too small for the silence she carried. "The one at St. Anne's in March," Mrs. Alvarez said quietly. She was in the front row of the children's choir. Blue ribbon in her hair. White tights. She kept looking at the door. Daniel felt something sink in his chest with terrible precision. March. He had been in Chicago that day, closing an acquisition he could barely remember now. He could still picture the boardroom, though. The polished walnut table. The pitcher of ice water sweating onto coasters. The congratulations. He could not picture his daughter in a blue ribbon. He stood there longer than he meant to while Lily climbed the stairs without asking for help and without looking back. The house around them glowed with every kind of comfort money could buy. Warm recessed lighting. Fresh lilies in the hall vase. A fire already lit in the sitting room. And still it felt strangely airless, as if all the expensive rooms had forgotten how to hold a family. Daniel loosened his tie with one hand and looked down at the drawing again. The crayon sun in the corner was bright yellow, almost defiant against the gray of the evening. The version of himself on the page had a smile. One arm over Emily. One arm over Lily. Present. Simple. There had been a time when that picture would not have been imagination. It would have been memory. "She used to draw every day," Mrs. Alvarez said, softer now. "After Mrs. Whitmore passed, she kept drawing the 3 of you anyway. Then one day she stopped drawing faces. Then she stopped drawing at all." Daniel closed his eyes for one short second. Upstairs, a bedroom door clicked shut. The sound was light, almost polite, but it landed in him harder than any slammed door could have. He started toward the staircase, then stopped again. "Does she still have dinner in her room?" he asked. Mrs. Alvarez gave him a look he could not quite bear. "Only when she thinks you are working late," she said. "Tonight she asked if you were home. I told her yes." She still went upstairs. Daniel nodded once, though the motion felt useless. A man could lose a wallet in one careless second. Apparently, he could lose his daughter in slow motion. One missed recital, one canceled breakfast, one half-heard answer at a time, until the distance looked natural from the outside and only unbearable when someone handed it back to him folded in crayon. He climbed the stairs with the drawing in his hand, each step muffled by the runner, each breath sounding too loud in the elegant quiet. When he reached Lily's door, he lifted his hand to knock and found, to his own surprise, that it was trembling. He knocked once, softly enough that it almost disappeared into the hush of the hallway. "Lily." Daniel waited with his hand still lifted, listening to the small, expensive quiet of the house. Somewhere downstairs, dishes touched porcelain in the kitchen. Rain moved gently against the windows at the far end of the corridor. From inside the bedroom, there was no answer. He knocked again, a little firmer this time. "It is Dad." The words sounded strangely formal, as if they belonged to a man introducing himself to a stranger, and that realization settled over him with a dull, steady weight. After a few seconds, he turned the brass handle and pushed the door open just enough to see in. A warm amber lamp glowed from the nightstand, casting a circle of light across the room. Lily sat on the rug by the bed in pale blue pajamas, her knees tucked beneath her, the stuffed rabbit folded in her lap. She had lined up colored pencils in a perfect row beside an open sketchbook, but the page in front of her was blank. Not half-finished, not crossed out, just blank, as if even trying had begun to feel risky. Daniel stayed by the door at first. Her room was still full of the things he had paid for and almost never noticed. White bookshelves shaped like little houses. A canopy over the bed tied back with ribbons. Framed watercolor animals along the wall. Emily had chosen most of it when Lily was 5, laughing over fabric swatches and paint cards while he answered emails at the kitchen island, half listening, certain there would always be more time to step into moments later. There had not been. Lily looked up once when the door opened, then lowered her eyes to the empty page again. Daniel stepped inside. The carpet muted his footsteps completely. He had no script for this, no prepared sentence polished by assistants or softened by public relations instincts. The drawing in his hand suddenly felt too personal to hold like evidence, so he knelt and placed it on the edge of her bedspread instead. "I found this," he said. Lily's fingers tightened around the rabbit's ear. She still did not speak. He corrected himself quietly, "someone gave it back to me." Her eyes lifted then, not to him, but to the drawing. Daniel watched the smallest change move through her face. Not surprise. Recognition. Embarrassment, maybe. Hurt, certainly. The kind children wore without hiding because they had not yet learned how much adults preferred comfort over honesty. He sat down slowly on the carpet across from her, leaving space between them. His knees protested the hard floor. He hardly noticed. "Mrs. Alvarez told me about the recital," he said. Lily's pencil rolled from her lap to the rug with a tiny wooden click. Daniel swallowed. "I should have been there." He waited, but the room only filled with the low hum of the heating vent and the soft drag of rain at the window pane. "I know saying that does not fix anything," he went on. "I know I have missed too much." His voice caught on that last word, and he hated how late truth always seemed to arrive, how it only sounded pure after damage had already been done. Lily reached for one of the pencils, then stopped halfway. Daniel followed her gaze to the sketchbook. On the inside cover, written in Emily's neat looping hand, were the words, "Draw what you love, sweetheart." For one painful second the room seemed to hold all three of them at once, not in sight, but in shape. Emily in the handwriting, Lily in the silence, Daniel in the distance between who he had been and who he had allowed himself to become. "Did you stop drawing because of me?" he asked before he could stop himself. Lily's chin trembled once. She looked at the drawing on the bed again, then at the blank page in front of her. When she finally moved, it was not toward him. She reached beside the sketchbook, picked up a dark blue pencil, and wrote 4 slow words at the bottom of the empty page in careful block letters. "You were not there." Daniel read them once and felt the truth of them settle deeper than blame. There was no anger in the sentence. That was what made it unbearable. Only fact. Only absence. Clean and simple enough for a child to write. He lowered his eyes, then nodded, because to deny even a single inch of it now would have been another kind of leaving. "You are right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I am here tonight." Lily stared at the page for a long moment, then wrote again without looking up. For how long? Daniel looked at the 4 words on the page and understood that no careful answer would help him now. Children could. Hear promises cracked before adults even finish speaking them. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat, took out his phone, and set it face up on the rug between them. The screen glowed at once with missed calls, calendar alerts, tomorrow morning's briefing, a red flag on the Tokyo numbers, and 3 messages marked urgent. For years that little rectangle had ruled the shape of his days more honestly than any vow ever had. Lily's eyes flicked to it, then back to him. Daniel held her gaze for the first time without flinching. "Until you fall asleep," he said quietly. "And when you wake up, I will still be here for breakfast." Lily did not move. The heating vent hummed softly above them. Somewhere in the walls, pipes clicked as the old house adjusted to the cold. Daniel picked up the phone, pressed one button, and turned it all the way off. The screen went black, sudden and final, and in the silence that followed he realized how long it had been since he had willingly disappeared from the world for even 5 minutes. Lily stared at the dark screen as if she did not quite believe what she had seen. Then she lowered her eyes to the sketchbook again and wrote another question beneath the first. "No meetings." Daniel shook his head. "No meetings." She added a third line, smaller this time. "No leaving after I sleep." He swallowed. "No leaving after you sleep." It felt strange, answering a child in vows, but maybe that was what fatherhood had always been when stripped of speeches and excuses, just a series of promises small enough to keep and sacred enough not to break. Lily set the pencil down and looked at the drawing on the bed, the old one with the giant sun and the smiling faces. Daniel watched her eyes rest on the woman in the center. Emily had once filled every room of this house with warmth that made even bad news easier to carry. After she was gone, Daniel had mistaken structure for strength. He had tightened everything. The schedules, the rules, the careful distance he told himself was necessary to keep the rest of life from collapsing. He had not understood that grief could harden into absence if no one interrupted it. "Do you want some hot chocolate?" he asked, surprising himself. Lily blinked. It was such an ordinary question that it seemed almost foreign in the room. She did not answer out loud. She just gave the smallest nod. Daniel stood, knees stiff from the carpet, and hesitated near the door. "I do not know how to make it the way Mom did," he admitted. That earned the faintest change in Lily's face, not quite a smile, not yet, but something less shut than before. She picked up the dark blue pencil again and wrote on the page, "Use real milk. Tiny marshmallows. Stir slow." Daniel read the words and let out a breath that almost felt like a laugh, though gentler, shakier. "I can do that," he said. In the kitchen downstairs, the house had already settled into nighttime quiet. Mrs. Alvarez looked up from wiping the counter when Daniel entered, and whatever she saw on his face made her set the cloth down without speaking. He found the saucepan himself, poured the milk himself, opened the cabinet where the mug sat in neat rows, realizing with a flush of shame that he had never once noticed which one Lily liked best. Mrs. Alvarez reached past him and placed a small white mug with painted stars by the stove. He glanced at her. She only nodded toward the marshmallows and said, very softly, "Stir slow." When he carried the tray back upstairs, the hot chocolate sent a ribbon of sweet steam into the dim hallway. Lily had moved from the floor to the bed, knees tucked under the blanket, the old drawing beside her like something rescued. Daniel set the tray on the nightstand and handed her the mug with both hands. She wrapped her fingers around it, careful, quiet, and took one small sip. Then she looked at him, not through him, not past him, but at him. It lasted only a second. It was enough to make his chest tighten. Daniel pulled the desk chair beside her bed and sat down. The lamp cast a warm circle over the rug, the sketchbook, the cooling mug, and the blank page waiting for whatever came next. For the first time in longer than he wanted to measure, he did not feel trapped by the stillness. He felt invited into it. The clock on Lily's nightstand glowed 9:47 in soft blue numbers, and the room settled around them with the fragile calm of something. Not yet healed, but no longer breaking. Daniel sat in the small desk chair with his elbows on his knees, watching the steam fade from Lily's mug in thin white ribbons. She had only taken 3 sips, but the color had returned a little to her face, and the tightness around her eyes had eased. Outside, the rain had finally weakened to a whisper against the windows, a hush after a long argument with the sky. Lily set the mug down carefully on the coaster Emily had once picked out from a museum gift shop, a round one painted with tiny gold stars. Then she reached for the sketchbook again. Daniel did not speak. He had begun to understand that silence could be respect when it was not abandonment. Lily turned past the page where she had written her questions and stopped at a clean sheet near the back. Her fingers hovered over the row of colored pencils, then chose the yellow one first. Daniel felt that choice before he understood why. Yellow had always been Emily's color. Sunflowers on the kitchen counter in July. The lemon scarf she wore in October. The legal pad she used for grocery lists because she said ordinary errands deserved cheerful paper too. Lily bent over the page and began to draw in slow, careful strokes. A circle first, then lines around it. A sun, not giant this time. Smaller, softer, realer. Daniel watched the shape appear and felt how sacred the moment was, how easily one wrong word could make her retreat again. So he kept still. He listened to the faint scratch of pencil against paper and the old house breathing around them. After a minute, Lily switched to green, then blue. A strip of grass. A square house. 2 windows. The front door. She paused, glanced once toward him, then back to the page. Daniel did not move except to let his hands unclasp from each other. She added a third figure beside the house, then a second. One tall, one small. The third spot on the page remained empty for so long that his chest tightened. He knew who belonged there. He knew some absences could never be redrawn in a way that did not hurt. Finally, Lily reached for the pink pencil and, with visible care, drew a woman between them. The figure was simple, almost childlike, but the hair was long, and the smile curved gently across the small, oval face. Daniel looked down before the burn behind his eyes could rise too quickly. When he lifted his gaze again, Lily had written one word above the woman's head in neat block letters. Mom. The room seemed to tilt around that little word. Daniel breathed in slowly, the scent of cocoa and paper and lavender detergent filling his lungs. And for the first time in 2 years, he did not force himself past Emily's memory like it was a doorway too painful to enter. He let it stand there between them, not as a wound alone, but as someone still loved. Lily placed the pencil down and slid the sketchbook a few inches across the bed toward him. It was not a big movement. It might have gone unnoticed by anyone not desperate enough to recognize grace in inches. Daniel leaned forward and looked at the page. At the house. At the small 3-person family under the modest yellow sun. At the empty white space around them that somehow made the figures feel even more tender, as if the drawing itself knew life did not stop hurting just because love returned to the room. Beside the picture, Lily took the dark blue pencil and wrote 3 more words. You can stay. Daniel read them once, then again, because his heart did not trust his eyes. He lifted his head slowly. Lily had curled under the blanket now, the stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin, her face tired but open in a way it had not been an hour earlier. Daniel stood, crossed to the bed, and pulled the comforter gently to her shoulder. Then he did what he had not done in longer than he could forgive. He sat on the edge of her bed, rested one hand lightly over hers above the blanket, and stayed. Daniel did not realize he had fallen asleep until the first gray light of morning touched the edge of Lily's curtains and turned the gold stars on her wallpaper pale and quiet. His neck ached from the angle of the chair he had dragged beside her bed sometime after midnight, and one of his hands had gone numb where it still rested loosely over hers above the blanket. For a brief second, he forgot where he was. Then he saw the sketchbook. On the comforter, the cup with the dried ring of cocoa at the bottom, and Lily's stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her chin, and memory returned with unusual gentleness. Lily was already awake. She was lying on her side, watching him with the solemn, searching look children had when they were deciding whether a grown-up had kept a promise or merely borrowed one for the evening. Daniel straightened slowly, brushing sleep from his face with one hand. Good morning, he said, his voice rough from too little rest and too much thinking. Lily did not speak, but she glanced at the chair, then at the blanket, then back at him, and something in her shoulders loosened. He had stayed. The truth of that sat between them like a small, warm thing neither of them wanted to startle. Daniel stood and pulled the curtains open a few inches. Outside, the storm had passed. Manhattan looked washed clean and silver under the early light. Rooftops gleamed. Water clung to the iron balconies across the street. Down below, a delivery truck hissed to the curb, and somewhere in the distance a siren faded into the morning traffic. Behind him, paper shifted softly. He turned. Lily had opened the sketchbook again. She wrote without hurry, pressing carefully as if she wanted each word to last. Did you really stay all night? Daniel came back to the bed and sat on the edge. Yes, he said. I told you I would. Lily studied his face for a moment, then wrote another line beneath it. Because of the drawing. He could have lied then, softened it, made himself sound better than he was. Instead, he looked at the page, at her small handwriting, and answered the way he should have answered years ago whenever she had deserved honesty more than comfort. Because of the drawing, he said, and because I should have stayed a long time ago. Lily lowered her eyes. For one heartbeat, he thought she might close again, retreat into that careful silence she had built like a second skin. But then she turned the page and wrote one more question. Who found it? Daniel saw at once that she was not asking about the wallet. She meant the drawing, the thin paper, the proof that someone had seen what he had missed. A woman outside the hotel, he said. She gave me back my wallet, and she tucked your picture inside. Lily's pencil paused. Then it moved again. Did she know it was mine? I think she did, Daniel said quietly. He remembered Naomi standing in the rain, soaked through, refusing the reward without even glancing at the money, her eyes lifting past him to the back seat, as if she had seen the child before she saw the man. He remembered how easily he had mistaken decency for inconvenience. The shame of that settled over him again, but this time it came with direction. Lily tapped the page lightly with the eraser end of the pencil until he looked down. Another line had appeared. I want to say thank you. Daniel read the words twice. Then he looked at his daughter, really looked at her, at the care in her face, at the courage it had taken for her to write even that. Something steady formed in him, stronger than regret, because it was finally willing to move. Then we will find her, he said. And this time, when Lily met his eyes, belief did not arrive all at once. It arrived slowly, carefully, like morning light crossing a floor, but it arrived. By 8:15, the house had shifted into a kind of motion it had not known in months. Not frantic, not polished for guests. Human. Daniel stood in the kitchen without his suit jacket, sleeves rolled once at the forearms, while Mrs. Alvarez placed a plate of toast on the table and tried very hard not to look surprised. Lily sat near the window in a navy sweater and white leggings, her hair brushed but still slightly uneven where Daniel had attempted the ribbon himself and failed on the first try. The bow leaned to one side. Lily had noticed. She had not corrected him. Sunlight spilled across the marble counter in a pale gold sheet, touching the silver fruit bowl, the untouched espresso machine, and the sketchbook Lily had brought downstairs like something she was no longer willing to leave behind. Daniel set a glass of orange juice beside her and then, after the briefest hesitation, took the seat across from her instead of at the far end of the table where he usually read financial briefings over untouched eggs. The distance between those two chairs was less than 3 feet. It felt larger than some oceans. Lily picked up a piece of toast, broke off one corner, and looked toward him. Daniel understood the look. I have already canceled the morning, he said. No meetings. No calls. We are going to find her. Mrs. Alvarez turned away then, pretending to wipe a counter that was already clean. Lily lowered her eyes to the sketchbook and wrote on the top corner of a page. Before school. Daniel read the words upside down and nodded. Before school. He reached for his phone, then stopped when he saw the black screen and remembered turning it off the night before. That tiny pause told him more about his life than any executive coach ever had. He turned it on now, but instead of diving into the flood of messages, he called the driver first. Martin, he said when the man answered. Last night outside the Bellmere Hotel, the woman who returned my wallet, I need the security footage from the entrance. Immediately, there was a brief silence on the line, not confusion, but surprise at hearing urgency pointed somewhere other than business. Yes, sir, Martin said. Daniel ended the call and set the phone down again. Lily watched him the way one watches a bridge being tested for weight. Do you remember anything about her? He asked gently. Lily thought for a moment, then wrote 2 careful words. Kind eyes. Daniel felt that answer land somewhere deep. Not her coat, not her face, not the color of her shoes or the sound of her voice. Kind eyes. Children always seem to find the truest thing first. 20 minutes later, Martin arrived with a tablet and a printed still from the hotel camera. The image was grainy with rain, but Naomi was unmistakable, standing beneath the awning with her jacket darkened by water, one hand extended, the other pressed briefly to her side, as if she were catching her breath after running. Daniel took the printout from Martin and looked at her properly for what felt like the first time. Not as an interruption, not as a stranger, as the person who had reached into the wreckage of his private life and returned something he had not known how to ask for. "Can we find her?" he asked. Martin glanced down at the image. "The diner logo on her apron is visible in one frame," he said. "Rosie's Midtown Grill, 48th and 9th. Daniel looked at Lily. Something bright and startled moved across her face, small but undeniable, like hope opening one careful inch at a time. She closed the sketchbook, slid off her chair, and reached for her coat before anyone told her to. Daniel stood too, taking his keys from the counter, then leaving them behind when he remembered Martin would drive. Outside, the morning was crisp and washed clean after the storm, the sidewalks glittering in places where puddles still held the sky. As they stepped toward the waiting car together, Daniel realized this was the first time in years he was leaving the house not to build a fortune, defend an empire, or outrun grief, but to say thank you to a woman who had seen his daughter in one glance and him in one truth. Rosie's Midtown Grill sat on the corner of 48th and 9th, like it had survived 3 different versions of the city and trusted none of them. The red neon in the front window still buzzed faintly even in daylight, and the glass held the ghost of last night's rain in streaks that caught the morning sun. Inside, the place smelled like fresh coffee, butter on a hot griddle, and the clean citrus bite of floor polish. A waitress with silver hoops balanced 2 plates of pancakes on one arm. A cook shouted for more hash browns through the service window. Cups clicked against saucers. The whole room moved with the fast, ordinary rhythm of working people who did not have the luxury of letting feelings slow down breakfast. Naomi Carter stood behind the register in a pale blue uniform polo with rosies stitched over the pocket, a pin tucked behind one ear, and her curls pulled back in a loose knot that had already given up in the steam. She was counting singles from the cash drawer when the bell over the door rang, and the diner's noise seemed to shift around the shape of what entered. Daniel stepped in first, tall and careful, his coat unbuttoned, his expression stripped of the cool distance she remembered from the night before. Lily came in beside him, one hand wrapped around her sketchbook, the other resting lightly against the side seam of her coat. Naomi looked up, froze for half a second, and then straightened slowly, the stack of dollar bills still in her hand. Her eyes moved first to Daniel, then to Lily, and something soft but startled passed across her face. Not fear, not triumph, recognition. "Sir," she said, because the old reflex came easier than surprise. Daniel stopped a few feet from the counter. In the full morning light, without rain between them, Naomi could see the tiredness around his eyes more clearly. The man looked expensive, yes, but he also looked like he had not been able to hide from himself since she last saw him. "Please," he said quietly, "Daniel is fine." Naomi set the cash in the drawer and closed it with a soft click. "All right," she said. "Daniel." One of the busboys rushed past with a tub of coffee cups. Someone at booth 4 laughed too loudly at something on a phone. The city kept moving around them, indifferent to private reckonings. Daniel reached into his coat and placed Lily's rain-softened drawing on the counter between them. Naomi looked down at it, and then up at Lily. The little girl held her gaze for one long second before lowering her eyes again, though not all the way. "I came to say thank you," Daniel said. The words were simple, but there was no polish on them, no practiced ease. Naomi glanced at him, then at Lily's hand gripping the edge of the sketchbook. "You do not need to thank me," she said. "I just gave back what belonged to you." Daniel shook his head once. "No," he said, his voice lower now. "You gave back something I was losing." Naomi did not answer right away. She looked at the drawing again, her fingertips resting lightly on the edge of the paper as if it were fragile in more ways than one. Then her eyes lifted to Lily's face, and the whole diner seemed to fade a little at the edges. "I saw her in the car," Naomi said softly, "and I knew that look." Daniel watched her carefully. "Because of your son?" Naomi's hand stilled on the counter. For a brief moment the sounds of the diner came back sharper than before, forks against plates, the coffee machine releasing a hiss of steam, a delivery truck backing up somewhere outside with a slow electronic beep. Naomi's expression did not break, but it changed, like a door inside her had opened onto a room she did not often. "Let strangers see." "Yes," she said at last. "Because of my son." Lily looked up then, fully this time, and Naomi met her eyes with a kind of gentleness that made Daniel understand at once that whatever came next would not be about money or status or the thin formalities people hid behind when truth got too close. It would be about loss and children and the quiet ways one broken heart sometimes recognizes another. Naomi did not often speak about Isaiah to people who had only just learned her name. Grief was not something she carried loosely. It lived folded small and deep, like the church bulletin she still kept in the back of her dresser from the day of his memorial, edges worn soft from years of being touched and put away again. But there was something in Lily's face that morning, something open and fragile and brave, that made silence feel less protective than truth. Naomi rested both hands on the counter, the laminate cool beneath her palms, and let her eyes settle on the little girl instead of the man beside her. "My son was 8 when he got sick," she said gently. "He had the sweetest laugh you ever heard. Loud too. The kind that made people in grocery store lines smile without meaning to." Lily listened without moving. Even the fingers around her sketchbook had gone still. Daniel said nothing. Naomi was grateful for that. Toward the end, she continued, he got very quiet. Not because he was angry. Not because he stopped loving life. He just did not want me to see how scared he was. Children do that sometimes. They go silent when the feeling gets too big. They think they are protecting the grown-ups. Across the diner, somebody called for more coffee. A spoon chimed lightly against a ceramic mug. Sunlight shifted across the counter and touched the damp edge of Lily's drawing where rain had once softened the paper. Naomi looked at it for a moment before lifting her gaze back to Daniel. "Last night, when I saw her sitting in the back seat, I recognized that kind of quiet," she said. "I have seen children disappear before they ever leave the room. It starts small. They stop asking. Stop showing you things. Stop believing you will look." Daniel lowered his eyes, and Naomi knew the words had landed where they needed to, not as punishment, as witness. He drew a slow breath and let it out. "I thought I was holding everything together," he said. His voice was low, stripped of the old executive certainty. "After my wife died, I told myself that if I worked hard enough, organized enough, provided enough, then Lily would still feel safe. I did not understand that she needed me to be present, not efficient." Naomi gave the smallest nod. Grown people confuse those two all the time. For the first time since they had entered the diner, something like a faint smile touched the corner of Lily's mouth. It vanished quickly, but not before both adults saw it. Naomi reached beneath the counter and pulled out a small paper bag. Inside was a brand new box of crayons she had picked up from the pharmacy downstairs during her break a few days earlier. The colors were still sharp, untouched, full of all the ordinary hope packed into simple things. She placed the box beside Lily's sketchbook and slid it toward her. "These are for you," she said. Lily looked down at the crayons as if they were something much larger than wax and cardboard. Slowly, she opened the lid and touched the yellow one first. Naomi felt her throat tighten. Daniel watched the motion too, and Naomi could see it in his face, the understanding that healing did not arrive with speeches. Sometimes it arrived in a $10 box on a diner counter, in a child choosing color again. Lily lifted her eyes to Naomi, then wrote carefully on the top page of the sketchbook, "Thank you for seeing me." Naomi read the sentence and pressed one hand lightly to her chest, as though something there had been reached from across a great distance. Daniel looked at the words, then at his daughter, and whatever remained of the wall he had built around himself seemed to fall away without sound. He stepped closer to Lily, bent slightly so he could see the page at her level, and in a voice rough with everything he had finally learned to feel, he said, "I see you too." For a moment, nobody in Rosie's moved. Not the waitress carrying coffee to booth 6. Not the line cook calling out an order for eggs over easy. Even the old man near the window with the newspaper, folded under one hand, seemed to fade into the bright hum of the diner as something quiet and important settled over the counter. Lily looked down after her father spoke, her lashes lowering slowly, as if the words had reached a place inside her that had been closed for too long to trust easily. Naomi could feel it too, that fragile turning point when a child decided whether hope was safe enough to touch again. Daniel reached into his coat pocket, then, and pulled out a slim leather card case. The gesture was automatic, old habit moving faster than his heart. "Naomi," he said, voice steady but humbled now, "I do not know how to repay what you have done for my daughter. Naomi's eyes dropped to the card case, then rose back to his face. She already knew what sat inside it. Money, access, assistance from a world that measured gratitude in numbers because numbers were easier than change. She gave the smallest shake of her head. No, she said softly. Do not do that. Daniel paused, his hand still half extended. Naomi nodded toward Lily's sketchbook instead of the card. You do not owe me anything that fits in a wallet, she said. You owe her time. Breakfast. Looking up when she speaks. Sitting down before she has to ask twice. The words were gentle, but they landed with the weight of something earned. Daniel lowered the card case slowly and slipped it back into his pocket without protest. That, more than any apology, told Naomi he was finally listening. Lily opened the new box of crayons fully now and lined them in a neat row beside her sketchbook. Red, blue, green, yellow, brown. The motions were careful, almost ceremonial, like she was rebuilding a language one color at a time. Naomi reached for a paper placemat and laid it flat in front of the girl, then took the diner pencil from behind her ear and set it beside the crayons. Go ahead, sweetheart, she said. You can draw him again, if he stays this time. Daniel looked at Naomi then, and whatever shame had been sitting in his chest all morning seemed to shift into something steadier, something willing to bear weight instead of avoid it. Lily lifted her eyes to her father, searching his face. Daniel did not rush to speak. He only took off his coat, folded it over the back of the nearest chair, and sat down in the booth beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. The movement was so simple it almost hurt to watch. Naomi felt her throat tighten. Lily stared at him for one long second, then slid the sketchbook onto the table between them. Daniel bent instinctively, his shoulder near hers, both of them looking at the blank page together. Naomi turned to the service window and called back for 2 pancakes, 1 side of bacon, 1 scrambled egg, and a short stack with extra strawberries. Make it 3 plates, she added. Mine can wait, said Marlene, the older waitress pouring coffee nearby. No, Naomi answered, glancing back at the booth. 1 is for him. He is staying. A few minutes later, Naomi carried the plates over herself. Butter melted into the pancakes in pale gold circles. Syrup caught the light in the little glass pitcher. The smell of warm batter and coffee rose between them like something homely enough to trust. She set the plates down and was about to step away when Lily reached for the edge of Naomi's sleeve. It was the lightest touch, barely there, but Naomi stopped at once. Lily took the dark blue crayon and wrote on the corner of the placemat in careful, deliberate letters. Sit 2. Naomi looked at the words, then at Daniel. He shifted to the inside of the booth without a word, making room as naturally as if he had been doing it all his life. Naomi slid in across from them, the vinyl seat warm from the morning sun. For the first time since Emily died, Daniel Whitmore sat in a diner booth with his daughter, a black woman who had every reason to walk away from his life, and a sketchbook opening between them like a door. The pancakes cooled slowly between them, steam thinning into the bright diner air, while Lily turned the sketchbook toward herself and chose the yellow crayon again. Sunlight lay across the table in a warm rectangle, catching the syrup glass, the silverware, the soft edge of Naomi's paper coffee cup. Around them, Rosie's kept moving in its ordinary, faithful rhythm. Orders called. Plates clinked. The front door opened and shut with a tired bell. But inside the booth, time seemed to gather itself into something quieter, something willing to be remembered. Lily drew carefully, her small hand steady now. First the table, then 3 mugs, then 3 figures seated close together instead of far apart. Naomi watched without interrupting, one hand curled around her coffee, the other resting in her lap, where old grief and new tenderness met in a way that almost hurt. Daniel sat beside his daughter, not checking his phone, not glancing toward the windows, not measuring the minutes against obligations waiting elsewhere. He was simply there, shoulder near hers, watching each line appear as if it mattered more than every contract he had signed in the last 10 years. Maybe, Naomi thought, it did. Lily finished the drawing and slid it toward the middle of the table. Daniel looked down. On the page was a diner booth under a square yellow light, a little girl between 2 adults, all 3 leaning toward the same page, the same meal, the same morning. Above them Lily had written, in careful block letters that still carried the softness of childhood, we stayed. Daniel stared at the words until his vision blurred. He did not wipe his eyes right away. He had spent too long treating emotion like something to manage in private, something to outwork and outwait. But the truth sitting on that page was too simple for pride to survive. Naomi did not look away. She let him have the moment without rescuing him from it. That was another kind of kindness, one the world rarely named. Daniel reached into his coat pocket then and pulled out the wallet, setting it gently on the table beside the new box of crayons. The leather was dark and expensive, smooth with use, the kind of object meant to signal control. Beside it, the crayon box looked almost laughably small, bright cardboard, edges already softened by Lily's fingers. Daniel looked at them both and let out a breath that sounded like surrender in the best possible way. I spent so long thinking this was what I carried, he said quietly, his fingers brushing the wallet once. Then he looked at the drawing, at Lily, at Naomi. I was wrong. Naomi said nothing. She did not need to. Lily looked up at her father, then at the drawing again. Her lips parted slightly, and when she spoke, the sound was soft from disuse, almost fragile, but it moved through. Daniel like sunlight through a room that had been closed too long. Daddy, just that. One word. No speech. No miracle loud enough for strangers to applaud. But Daniel went still as stone, then warm all at once. He turned to her, so quickly his knee nudged the table. I am here, he whispered, and this time the answer held. Lily leaned against his arm with the easy trust of a child testing whether home could be built again in real time. Daniel closed his eyes for one brief second and bowed his head toward hers. Across from them, Naomi looked down into her coffee, blinking against the sting in her eyes. Outside, the city flashed and hurried and demanded as it always would. Inside, a wealthy man sat in a worn diner booth with his daughter pressed close and the woman who had handed him back more than a wallet. He had almost lost her in inches, in meetings, in silence, in all the polished ways a person can disappear while still sitting right in front of you. But now the wallet